Guys, tonight we're going to talk about something both horrifying and strangely comforting. The ancient, unsanitary, yet civilization-shaping world of medieval toilets and how a global pandemic, the Black Death, changed them forever. You're about to step into a time when privacy was rare, plumbing was optional, and sanitation was mostly a matter of wind direction and luck. You'll hear footsteps echoing through cobbled alleys, the slosh of chamber pots emptied from second-story windows, and the rustle of skirts above a filthy moat. You'll wander through stone towers, crowded tenements, and monasteries that smelled less like holiness and more like compost. And while this may sound like the kind of story that makes you grateful for your modern bathroom, don't get too smug just yet. Because by the time the Black Death swept across Europe, everything, and we mean everything, was on the table for rethinking, especially the way people dealt with their daily offerings. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are, and what's the last weird historical fact you heard before bed? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in a city. The year is 1346, somewhere between Genoa and Constantinople. It smells bad. Not burnt popcorn bad. Not someone microwaved fish bad. We're talking multi-layered fermented filth. There's the smell of rotting food, the iron scent of blood from the butcher's stall, and somewhere beneath it all, the ever-present perfume of human waste. Why? Because toilets, as you know them, don't exist yet. You peek behind a modest wooden home and find a simple pit latrine, a hole in the ground often shared between families, with a board laid across it and a pile of hay for wiping. If you're lucky, it's outside. If you're not, it might be under your stairs. Or worse, beneath your bedroom floorboards, seeping upward in the summer. The wealthy had better options, of course. Manor houses and castles had garderobes, small stone closets built into outer walls. You'd sit on a wooden plank with a hole in it, and gravity would take care of the rest. Kind of. The waste would drop into a cesspit or directly into the moat, turning "don't fall in" into actual life advice. These setups were, let's say, functional, but they were far from hygienic, especially in cities. Urban centers like London, Florence, and Paris had open sewers called kennels that ran through the middle of the street. Waste from humans and animals alike drained into them, occasionally, when it rained. Otherwise, it just sat there, baking, fermenting, and welcoming every rat within a 3-mile radius. Historians still argue whether these systems were truly sewers or just glorified gutters. But either way, people knew the situation wasn't great. Smell was a constant concern. Many believed disease traveled through foul air, known as miasma. So, stenches weren't just unpleasant. They were dangerous. You turn a corner, and spot a woman tossing a bucket's contents from her second-story window. She shouts the customary warning, "Gardez-le." It's meant to give you time to step aside, but you're still mid-thought when the splash hits the cobblestones a few feet from your boots. Welcome to medieval sanitation. You might be wondering, why didn't people build proper toilets earlier? The Romans had them right. Good memory. They did. Rome had communal latrines, aqueducts, and sewer systems, like the Cloaca Maxima. But after the fall of the empire, that infrastructure deteriorated, and much of the knowledge was lost or deemed sinful. Bathing became suspect. Nakedness was scandalous. And complex plumbing, too expensive, too pagan, too unnecessary. So Europe improvised with ditches, chamber pots, and a heavy reliance on rain. But then, just as people were getting used to living ankle-deep in filth, the Black Death arrived. It didn't just kill people. It shook every assumption about cleanliness, health, and what it meant to be a civilized city. And yes, it changed toilets forever. But for now, you crouch beside a pile of hay in a filthy alley, trying to breathe through your mouth. You think about the simplicity of modern plumbing, the miracle of flushing, the underrated luxury of a private stall, and you realize it didn't come easy. It came after death, a lot of it. You're standing at the edge of the sea, somewhere near Messina, Sicily, in the autumn of 1347. The air is thick with salt and smoke. Ships are pulling into harbor, normal wooden merchant ships with sails like patchwork bedsheets and hulls creaking under cargo. But this time, the cargo is different. You don't know it yet, but death is disembarking. Rats scurry down the ropes. Fleas leap from fur to fabric. Dock workers unload goods crates, spices, and silently, invisibly, the Yersinia pestis bacterium begins its journey inland. Within days, people start coughing. Within weeks, the city changes. And by the time anyone tries to flee, it's too late. The Black Death has landed. Over the next few years, it will tear through Europe like a wildfire soaked in vinegar. Whole towns vanish. 1 out of every 3 people gone. Some places lose half their population. Others lose more. Bodies pile up faster than gravediggers can bury them. Fear becomes law. And no one, not the king, not the monk, not the stable boy, is safe. And here's the strange part. As horrific as the plague is, it doesn't just kill people. It kills assumptions about medicine, about morality, and especially about sanitation. You walk through the streets of a city just beginning to unravel. People wear strange herbs around their necks. Some carry sweet-smelling flowers. Others burn incense in their homes, believing the smoke will keep the bad air out. There's a general belief that the disease is airborne, spread through stench-rot filth. Miasma theory. And in a weird way, they're kind of right. Not about the air, but about the filth. You see, the plague spreads best in overcrowded, unhygienic places where rats thrive and waste is everywhere. And medieval cities, perfect conditions. So, what happens when you have a population terrified of death, convinced that smell equals sickness? You get something unexpected, a public obsession with toilets. Historians still argue whether the link between plague and cleanliness was truly causal or just coincidental. But there's no denying that in the wake of the Black Death, attitudes shifted. What was once tolerated filthy alleyways, communal cesspits, overflowing gutters became intolerable. And for the first time in centuries, cities began to think seriously about waste management. Not because they suddenly discovered germs, but because fear is a great motivator. You walk through a street where every door is marked with a red X. The residents inside have either died or fled. Flies swarm around a pile of waste that no one's cleaned for weeks. The smell is dizzying, stale urine meat, gone bad the sickly sweet reek of decomposition. Then, across town, you see something different. A monk scrubbing the steps of a church with vinegar, a nun burning lavender near the sickbeds, a servant pouring lime into a latrine pit to mask the smell. These weren't widespread habits before, but now everyone is trying anything, even if they don't know why. One particularly strange idea begins to take hold, that clean smells equals health and bad smells equals plague. It leads to scented pomanders, rose water sprays, and an early version of what we might call toilet hygiene. Some people even start washing more. Not everyone, but enough. Quirky tidbit. In some towns, people were paid to walk around smelling nice human air fresheners to ward off miasma. Imagine that job description on your resume. And yet, under the perfumes and prayers, the actual problem still lingers: waste, the human kind, the animal kind, and the complete lack of coordinated systems to deal with either. This is where change begins, not with innovation, but with desperation. You pass a row of houses where new signs are going up. They forbid the dumping of chamber pots into the street. Not that people obey, but the signs are new. The idea is new. That filth might not just be unpleasant, it might be deadly. Cities start appointing sanitation inspectors. Not many, not effective, but a start. And behind closed doors, wealthy families begin altering their homes, adding small waste pits, creating primitive latrines that drain into hidden alleys instead of open streets. Privacy, once a luxury, becomes a survival instinct. The poor don't have that option. Their lives remain exposed. Shared toilets, shared risks, shared grief. The plague doesn't care about wealth, but hygiene. Hygiene is becoming a status symbol. And in the shadows of all this, toilets start evolving. Not in leaps, not yet, but in steps. A few bricks at a time, a few rules at a time. You watch as a world wrapped in rot begins to look inward, not just in fear, but in curiosity. People start asking, What if it's not the stars? What if it's not sin? What if it's us? And that question, it flushes history forward. You're back in the city again, but it feels different now, edgier. Not just sick, but scared, sick. The kind where the air hums with suspicion, and people start looking at their neighbors like biohazards. By 1349, plague rumors move faster than carts. Whispers that certain wells are poisoned, that laundry spreads the disease, that if you smell the wrong thing at the wrong time, you're next. And through it all, waste keeps accumulating. Not metaphorical waste, literal human excrement, the kind no one wants to deal with when half the town is dying and the other half is hiding. And yet somehow there's more of it than ever. Because when the usual systems collapse, when the gong farmers stop showing up, when no one maintains the cesspits, when people stop paying the street cleaners, what's left behind? All of it. Every privy becomes a potential plague source. Every ditch, every bucket, every nighttime trot to the corner. And in the absence of solutions, people start improvising in ways that range from creative to catastrophic. Let's talk about one of the most infamous medieval waste habits: flying toilets. Not the kind you imagine zooming through the air with wings, but the practice of flinging waste from windows. It was common enough before the plague, but now with the fear that lingering smells might kill, the practice becomes almost frantic. People toss waste out at all hours, not just at the prescribed times. The customary shout of Gardaloo becomes less a warning and more of a ritual bark into chaos. If you're lucky, you're walking fast enough. If you're not, congratulations. You've become a statistical footnote in medieval urban hygiene. This sudden increase in uncontrolled dumping turns many city streets into swamps of disease and dread. In London, some areas become so clogged with human waste that even the carts get stuck. Paris issues fines for night pot accidents. And in Florence, which is trying desperately to pretend it still functions, a new wave of public complaints rolls in most about the vileness underfoot. Historians still argue whether city ordinances passed during this time were actually enforced, or just decorative panic responses. But the documents are real. Laws against dumping, laws requiring latrine walls, laws banning the emptying of chamber pots near public markets, toilet laws. At last, they don't work well. People keep dumping. But the very fact that authorities are trying is huge. It marks a shift. Waste isn't just gross. It's a public danger, a visible symbol of whether your town is surviving or surrendering. And the class divide, oh, it's growing. The wealthy begin fencing off alleys, building private garderobes that direct waste into hidden pits. Some even start adding ventilation holes, tiny slits carved into the walls to improve air circulation. Others experiment with wood ash or herbs to deodorize. Not perfect, but a step. Meanwhile, the poor continue to share what little they have, sometimes one latrine for 20 people, and often none at all. For them, a bush outside the walls or a bucket in the corner of a tenement room is all there is. And still the plague keeps returning. Every wave deepens the panic, and every panic leaves a trail of experimental solutions. Some work, most don't. Some are just weird, quirky tidbit time. In certain cities, people start digging toilet trenches in front of their homes, not behind. Why? Because they think if the smells leave their homes, the plague will follow. It's like reverse psychology, but with poop. And you're trying to stay clean. But how there's no soap in every home, no running water. You carry a pouch of mint to press against your face. You sprinkle vinegar on your cloak. You pray. You hide. And when you need to go, you do it fast and you do it far from others. That's the paradox of the Black Death. It's an era when everything feels contagious, not just disease, but smells, people habits. So people distance themselves from the poor, from the sick, and increasingly from each other's bodily functions. Before the plague, privacy was rare. Now it's becoming a kind of hygienic virtue, the start of something new. Toilets begin their long transformation from communal chore to personal space. Not because anyone figured out microbiology, but because when you've watched entire neighborhoods vanish suddenly, the idea of keeping your business to yourself seems like a revolutionary act. You find yourself staring at a wall. It's made of thick stone, cool to the touch, and it belongs to a castle, not the fairy tale kind with glittering towers, but the gritty, moss-covered fortress type that smells like damp wool and old meat. You're not here for the view. You're here for the toilet. Welcome to the garderobe, medieval engineering's answer to the bathroom question. It's essentially a vertical shaft built into the outer wall of a castle. You open a narrow door and step inside a tiny stone cubicle just wide enough for you to shuffle in sideways. In the center is a smooth wooden bench with a hole cut out. You sit carefully. The hole drops down a long way. Some end in cesspits, some in open air, some romantically straight into the moat. Yep, that shimmering water around the castle. It's not just for show. It's also where the Duke's lunch ends up. This isn't an accident. It's gravity-based sanitation. And for the time, it's borderline brilliant, but also disgusting. Historians still argue whether castles had any real incentive to keep moats clean, or if they simply hoped the bacteria would duke it out with the alligators. The general consensus: moats were pestilent soup. There's a reason knights wore steel. It wasn't just for battle, it was for biohazard protection. You shuffle through a different hallway now, into a monastery. Here, things are slightly more refined. You discover something remarkable. Rows of stone seats, multi-stall latrines, some with small channels of running water beneath. The monks might not have known germ theory, but they had a sense of flow. These monastic toilets are some of the best in medieval Europe. Why? Because monks were obsessed with routine. They had time labor and a vested interest in not dying from typhoid. Some even had separate waste shafts for urine and feces, which is impressively modern if a bit labor-intensive. But here's the kicker. While castles and monasteries had rudimentary systems in place, most towns did not. The majority of medieval people used whatever was available: buckets, pits, ditches, or the good old flying method. And so, when the Black Death hit those with decent garderobes or monastic drains, were slightly better off, not because their waste disappeared, but because it wasn't sitting right beneath their feet or floating through their market squares. You climb a spiral staircase and peer out over a town square below. You spot a public privy, a wooden shed placed over a pit. It's shared by dozens, maybe hundreds. No locks, no privacy, no maintenance. Just hope. These public latrines quickly become disease magnets, and with plague fears rising, people begin to avoid them altogether. So, where do they go? You guessed it, the streets. There's a joke among chroniclers. From the time in London, the gutters are full of more than rain. It wasn't funny then, and it's not really funny now. But it tells you something about the desperation of the moment. People know their cities are sick. They feel it in their lungs, smell it in their clothes, hear it in the bell that tolls for yet another death. But what do they do about it? Sometimes nothing, and sometimes they build. Here's where things get interesting. Some wealthier homes start adding second garderobes, one for guests, one for the family. Others elevate theirs, literally, so they're less likely to be near the smells of the lower floors. A few even begin lining the waste shaft with lead or stone to slow seepage. Bad news. The lead eventually poisons them. Good news. It took a while. Quirky tidbit in one castle. A garderobe emptied into the space above the drawbridge entrance, making it not just a toilet, but a defensive measure. Welcome, invaders. Hope you packed boots. The point is, these weren't just architectural oddities. They were early indicators of a shift, an understanding, however vague, that where you put your waste matters. People didn't call it hygiene yet. They just called it survival. And you sitting there in the chill of the stone closet begin to feel the weight of that shift. This wasn't luxury. It wasn't even comfort. It was the slow, painful beginning of private sanitation. The idea that maybe, just maybe, your health depended on what happened after you stood up and walked away. You've left the castles and monasteries behind now, stepping into something more ordinary, a butcher's quarter in the heart of a plague-weary city. The smell hits first, not the familiar rot of excrement this time, but the raw tang of blood and meat left too long in the sun. Mixed with the ever-present sewage lining the cobblestones, it forms a bouquet that would stun a skunk. You watch a man hack at a pig carcass, then casually toss the entrails into the gutter. Behind him, a young boy empties a chamber pot into the same ditch. And just like that, you understand, toilets don't exist in isolation. They're part of a whole system, or lack thereof, of waste management. And when that system collapses, the toilet becomes a ticking bomb. During the plague, cities faced more than just dying people. They faced an unrelenting cascade of waste, dead bodies, butcher scraps, human refuse, and no functional way to separate it. Latrines overflowed, privies backed up. And in some towns, cesspits literally exploded their gases, igniting from lanterns or lightning strikes. If there's anything more medieval than being launched skyward by your own sewage, we haven't found it. Historians still argue whether these exploding privy stories are apocryphal or just exaggerated. But one 14th century English account does describe a man catapulted off his toilet seat during a thunderstorm. Whether myth or methane, it captures the era's general vibe, chaotic, filthy, and just dangerous enough to be memorable. And yet, beneath the horror, a strange clarity emerges. City leaders begin mapping out where waste is coming from. They notice patterns, disease clusters near butcher shops, shared tenements, and open cesspits. So they act not always wisely, but urgently. In some places, this leads to the earliest segregation of waste zones. Butchers are moved to the outskirts. Tanneries are banned from city centers. Latrines are placed further from wells. And rudimentary drainage systems, once ignored, get patched up. You see laborers digging trenches, not deep ones, but angled just enough to divert runoff. Wooden grates appear across gutters to catch the worst solids. Public notices go up forbidding waste dumping near marketplaces. It's like watching someone reinvent the idea of a sewer piece by awkward piece. Still, enforcement is spotty. In one town, an official posts a fine for dumping night soil near the cathedral, only to be caught doing the same thing behind his own stable. Hypocrisy, it turns out, smells the same no matter your social rank. Meanwhile, the privy economy starts to blossom. Enter the gong farmer, a brave, deeply underpaid individual who cleaned out cesspits by hand, equipped with a shovel, a bucket, and an iron constitution. They worked mostly at night. Their job, climb into the waste pit, scoop it out, and carry it by foot to the outskirts, where it would be dumped or sold as fertilizer. Quirky fact in many cities, gong farmers were legally forbidden from working during the day because of the smell, and they were often made to live in specific quarters, sometimes even downstream from the rest of the town. But they were necessary. And in plague times they became oddly respected. Because when everyone else was hiding from the smell of death, gong farmers went straight into it. You follow one down a side alley now. He's hauling 2 wooden buckets full of sludge. His boots squelch with every step. He hums a tune under his breath, something old and vaguely cheerful. And though you try not to, you breathe in and immediately regret it. Still, you can't deny it. He's part of what's keeping the city standing. Because for all the chaos, this is the moment medieval people begin to realize something truly radical. Sanitation is civic infrastructure, not a personal chore, not a divine punishment, a system, a shared responsibility. And so slowly, painfully, the pieces begin to fall into place, not evenly, not everywhere, but enough. Enough that a century from now, cities will build stone sewers under their streets. Enough that people will demand private privies in their homes. Enough that the toilet will become a room, not just a hole. And you, tiptoeing past a gong farmer, realize you're walking the filth-soaked path toward modern plumbing. It doesn't look like progress. It looks like a man ankle-deep in someone else's dinner from 2 nights ago. But history is rarely elegant. You're in a city that looks almost familiar now. The streets are still narrow. The stones are still slick. But something's shifted in the way people walk. Not just with haste or fear, but with caution, as if the ground might bite back. Because in some places, it already has. You follow a woman clutching a bundle of herbs, rue rosemary, and thyme tied together with twine and held just below her nose. Not because she likes gardening, but because she believes the scent can keep the plague away. She's not entirely wrong. The air here is thick with things no human should inhale. Decaying animals, unburied, waste, fermenting, laundry, spoiled food, and the raw, acrid stench of improperly buried sewage. And in this volatile atmosphere, people are starting to notice a disturbing trend. Sickness follows stink. No one's yet discovered bacteria, but they've discovered pattern. And patterns are powerful. So cities, those that can still function, begin to take real steps, literally. You hear the clang of hammers against stone. Workers are laying down what looks like a crude wooden pathway over one of the most congested streets. Not for beauty, for protection. It lifts pedestrians just above the muck, a thin line between survival and infection. And, beneath it, a rudimentary drainage channel carved directly into the earth. It's not Rome. It's not even remotely clean. But it's a start. This street, let's say it's in York, is one of many, now attempting a new form of waste control, open-air sewage gutters that run the length of major roads. Rain helps flush them, sometimes. When it doesn't, they clog and overflow, and everything ends up back where it started, under your feet. Historians still argue whether these gutters helped or hurt in the long run. Some believe they were essential in reducing surface waste. Others say they merely relocated the problem from behind the house to in front of the bakery. But here's the bigger shift: plumbing is becoming public. No longer just the concern of a chambermaid or house servant. Sanitation is now on the agenda of city councils, parishes, and even royal courts. Waste is in politics. In fact, King Edward III of England passed laws to remove noxious smells from London. He claimed it disrupted court proceedings. One infamous case involved a tannery so foul the king couldn't concentrate. His solution: relocate the business and fine the owner. Of course, the laws were poorly enforced. But even so, the king cared enough to write them down. That says something. Meanwhile, at the street level, Innovation continues. You wander into a merchant's home, modest by modern standards, luxurious by medieval ones. Here, you discover a two-seater latrine with one seat slightly higher than the other. A practical feature, parents could use one, while a child used the other. But even more intriguing, the merchant has recently installed something new, a pipe made from hollowed wood running from the privy out to a small cesspool in the garden. This is early home plumbing, not common, not affordable, but real. Quirky tidbit in some households, these wooden pipes were so valuable that thieves would steal them at night and resell them to less fortunate neighbors. Nothing like black market sewage logistics to add a little spice to your chamber pot narrative. You move on, crossing into the poorer districts again. Here, families still rely on communal waste pits, sometimes dug hastily between houses. You pause at one, noticing the makeshift planks laid over it, just wide enough to squat over, just fragile enough to snap under the wrong footstep. People die in these pits, often, and yet even here there's resistance to going backward. A widow with 3 children has rigged up a privacy curtain around her portion of the pit, using discarded linen and broken fence posts. She lights a bit of rosemary on a clay plate before she goes in, not to mask the smell, but to bless the space. Her toilet is not sacred, but it's hers. And it's cleaner than you'd expect, because even in poverty, even surrounded by disease, people begin to develop toilet routines. A little water poured after use, herbs scattered, ash thrown into the pit, small actions, repeated daily, taken seriously, and they begin to spread. By the late 1300s, travelers from one city notice different waste customs in another. Some bring them home. Others write them down. Pilgrims, traders, and scholars carry not just news and goods, but ideas about how to be cleaner. Toilets start to evolve regionally. In Lubeck, people experiment with brick-lined pits. In Florence, cesspits are linked to underground runoff canals. In Ghent, homes near rivers begin diverting their waste with gravity-fed chutes. Each method reflects its geography, its class, and its resources. But the trend is clear. The toilet, once an afterthought, is becoming a feature, not yet a right, not yet a room, but no longer invisible. And that's how change begins, with a pot, a pipe, a pit, and a very determined widow lighting rosemary in the dark. It's night again. The city sleeps uneasily, if at all. Fires flicker low in hearths, cats stalk along rooftops, and the faint rustle of rats sounds from the corners of half-abandoned houses. You follow a narrow alleyway, its cobblestones wet, not from rain, but from something less poetic. Here, in the quiet, the night soil men begin their rounds. These aren't gong farmers anymore. Not quite. They're their descendants, part of a growing urban underclass, tasked with dealing with what everyone else pretends vanishes at dawn. They wear thick leather boot scarves tied around their mouths and carry long-handled scoops. Their job is to empty the cesspits under houses carefully, methodically, and without splashing too much on themselves. They've begun organizing into loose guilds of a sort, unofficial but respected. They have roots, competition, and territory. Some even have rivalries leading to brawls over particularly profitable neighborhoods. Because where there's muck, there's money. Quirky detail. In a few places, night soil is no longer just disposed of, it's sold. Farmers on the outskirts buy it to fertilize their fields. They call it black gold, which is perhaps overselling it, but the name sticks. You trail one of these men down a cellar stair. He lifts a hatch, revealing the cesspit beneath. The smell hits hard. He doesn't flinch, just gets to work. Scoop, bucket, haul. And as you watch, something odd happens. You start to admire him. Not the job, not the smell, but the consistency, the rhythm, the fact that when the rest of the world sleeps or flees, he shows up, not as a hero, just as a necessity. And that word, that feeling, necessity, is where toilets begin to find their foothold in society, not as luxuries, not as indulgences, as things that must exist simply for everything else to function. This shift starts echoing in the written records. City officials begin keeping maintenance logs. Privy inspections are recorded. Complaints are filed not just about the presence of waste, but about the failure to remove it. Toilets become a public issue, a subject of letters and taxes and policy. Historians still argue whether these early sanitation laws were followed or ignored entirely. Many believe enforcement was largely symbolic, but there's no denying this. People now understand that waste is a threat not just to the nose, but to life itself. And so some towns begin innovating. Again, you travel north into what is now the Low Countries. There you see something that catches you off guard. A multi-story building, not a castle, not a monastery, just a plain urban home with indoor privies on every floor. How simple they're stacked vertically. Each one feeds into the same shaft. Gravity does the rest. It's rudimentary, a little risky, and definitely noisy, but it means the toilet is no longer just a hole in the backyard. It's now part of the house. These vertical shaft toilets become increasingly popular in denser towns, and with them come new challenges, namely, how to prevent the smell from rising straight back up through the house. And so, someone has an idea. Add a bend in the pipe. It won't be until much later that the S-bend becomes standard plumbing. But even now, you're seeing its philosophical ancestor, an early recognition that toilets need to control flow and smell. A whole new way of thinking is taking root. Toilets are becoming mechanical, still primitive, still dependent on servants or buckets or gravity, but increasingly intentional. And with intent comes experimentation. In southern France, a curious landowner begins building a latrine that uses rainwater collection to flush. In northern Italy, some families place sand pits beneath their toilets, believing the grit will filter disease. It doesn't. But the thinking is new. It's no longer just about moving waste away. It's about managing what happens after. You pause now outside a workshop. Inside, a craftsman is carving wooden toilet seats, shaped and sanded smooth. Once, these would have been rough planks. Now they're rounded, comfortable, stained with oil to repel moisture. That's right. Someone just made a designer toilet seat in the 14th century. Not because anyone asked for it, but because someone figured, why not? Because when toilets become permanent, comfort follows. It's a strange truth of history. Once a thing stops being temporary, people start making it beautiful. And so, the privy, once a shack, a trench, a box over a ditch, starts to become a space, a place, something you build around rather than in spite of. By now you've walked through so many of them that you hardly blink at the sight. But if you'd lived a century earlier, you'd be shocked. Because this is a revolution, not with banners or swords, but with pipes, scoops, bricks, and buckets, and a whole lot of patience. The rain begins before you see it, just a soft tapping at first on wood, on stone, on the curled tin pans left out on a windowsill. But as the drops multiply, so does something else, movement. People appear at doorways with buckets, not to hide from the rain, but to collect it. Why? Because rain is now a plumbing tool. Welcome to a city, trying something new, redirecting rainfall to manage waste. Not through pipes, not yet, but with gutters carved and sloped to encourage runoff away from homes toward newly dug ditches. It's primitive, yes, but it's the beginning of the intentional city drain. And underneath it all, a curious transformation is unfolding. Sanitation is starting to intersect with urban planning. You walk down a newly cobbled lane in Bruges. The stones aren't random. They're angled ever so slightly toward a shallow central gutter. Rain channels human and animal waste away from doorways. That's the idea anyway. The result, a slightly cleaner smell, and fewer outbreaks maybe. Historians still argue whether these cobbled systems truly lowered infection rates or merely moved the mess from one street to the next. But what's certain is this: people are paying attention to where their waste goes, and now cities are writing it down. Public ordinances are posted, some chiseled in stone, others painted on wooden boards near marketplaces. One from Lübeck forbids dumping refuse within 10 paces of a neighbor's well. Another from Florence fines anyone who throws night soil from an upstairs window. A bit late, perhaps, but it's progress. Of course, enforcement is spotty. In some places, laws change nothing. In others, they become the seeds of a growing municipal sanitation ethic. And that ethic breeds infrastructure. You find yourself walking past the city granary, and there, tucked behind the wall, is a covered drain. Not a pipe, exactly. More like a stone trough with a wooden lid. But it diverts runoff discreetly, preventing puddles where waste might collect. In another town, you come across what locals call the clean passage, an alley, repaved and widened so that carts collecting night soil can pass through without getting stuck. a small upgrade, but a real one. Cities are beginning to map their filth, and once you can map it, you can manage it. Enter the surveyor's men with crude tools and measuring cords who begin cataloging cesspits, drainage angles, waste routes, not because anyone asked, but because disease forces the issue. You pass one now. He's hunched over a sketch pad marking off a corner where 3 houses share a single latrine. He notes how waste flows during storms, how smells drift with the wind. It's not glamorous work, but it's the birth of environmental engineering. And while this all seems too little too late, it's not. Because without these slow, grubby steps, you don't get the later marvels. You don't get pipes, pumps, or water closets. You don't get modern plumbing. You get what's here, 1,000 small experiments scattered across time and space. One quirky example. In 1390s, Paris, a local tanner, begins experimenting with using charcoal layers beneath his waste pits. He believes it absorbs the stink. Does it work? Hard to say, but others copy him. Soon some pits come with straw ash, even dried moss, early filtration systems born not of science, but of desperation and routine. Desperation that gives birth to new professions. You meet a woman selling lavender bundles, not just for the nose but for the privy. Keeps the rats away, she claims, and whether that's true or not, she makes a living. You meet a boy hauling buckets, not of water, but of sand. Why? To scatter over shared latrines after use to dry out the waste faster. And you find a man with a little wagon full of wood ash and early deodorizers sold by the handful, 3 scoops for a penny. It's the beginning of an economy built around toilets, not just cleaners, not just farmers, but a full cast of vendors and tinkers all orbiting the latrine like it's the new town square. And maybe, in a way, it is, because toilets are no longer just physical. They're cultural. They define who can afford privacy, who gets clean air, who walks through a dry street versus one slick with runoff. They begin to reflect class. You enter a merchant's house with a tiled privy floor, windows for ventilation, and even, imagine this, a seat cover. Across town, a peasant family squats over an open trench with no barrier from the wind or the rats. Same need, vastly different experiences. And yet, both believe they're making progress. Because they are. Slowly, filthily, unavoidably. And now as you step outside and let the rain fall onto your shoulders, you realize this storm isn't just cleansing the streets. It's pushing history forward. It's past midnight now, but the city is far from still. You hear the creak of shutters, the clink of chamber pots, and the unmistakable splash of something hitting the cobblestones below. Someone upstairs just emptied their waste out the window again. You step aside just in time. Lucky you. And you're reminded even with new rules, old habits die hard, especially at night. Because if you're poor in the 14th century and nature calls after dark, your choices are limited. Go outside and risk getting robbed. Go downstairs and fumble with a splintered latch in the dark, or stay in your room, squat over a chamber pot, and toss the result out the window with a polite shout of "Gardyloo," if you remember to shout at all. That's what nighttime sanitation looks like in most cities: precarious, unpleasant, and very often airborne. Still, there's something strangely intimate about these routines. You step into a home and watch an elderly woman light a stub of tallow candle. She holds it over a battered chamber pot, checking the contents for signs of illness. She's no doctor, but she knows what to look for. She's buried enough family to learn the difference between a healthy movement and a worrying one. You wouldn't call her lucky, but she's adapted. The chamber pot becomes her tool, her routine, her way of regaining a sliver of control in a world teetering on chaos. These pots, by the way, come in every material imaginable: clay, pewter, brass, even hand-carved wood for the frugal. Some are decorative with floral motifs. Others have faces carved inside the bowl. Yes, really sometimes used to mock enemies or in-laws. Quirky fact: in some towns, young women gifted chamber pots to each other at weddings. It wasn't exactly romantic, but it was practical, like giving someone a mop and saying, "Here's to your future." And yet, the night holds dangers beyond poor taste. You follow a man stumbling home from a tavern chamber pot in one hand, candle in the other. He misjudges a step, trips, and drops the pot, its contents splattering across the stairwell and extinguishing the flame. He curses, quietly, but keeps moving, because for him, this is just Wednesday. Historians still debate whether chamber pots improved sanitation overall, or just redistributed the risk. They were better than nothing, but when emptied carelessly, they turned streets into cesspools. This led to a new trend: covered chamber pot cabinets, which concealed the pot in a piece of furniture. Think of it as the great-grandparent of the bathroom vanity. They looked like stools or nightstands with a hinged lid and a hole in the middle. Why? Because some people finally decided they didn't want to see the waste, even if they still had to smell it. And that's the quiet shift happening here, the move from tolerance to discomfort. From "this is life" to "there has to be a better way." You step into a small inn now, where travelers share rooms and bathrooms such as they are. You count 4 people taking turns with one pot, one hand-washing bowl, and one shared rag. It's not clean, but it's organized. In fact, more and more buildings begin to assign toilet space. Shared latrines become timed. Some inns provide chamber pot service, where servants empty them every few hours. It's not a revolution, but it's the start of toilet scheduling, the ancestor of your modern bathroom line. And with structure comes expectation. People begin to expect that toilets should be functional, that someone will clean them, that privacy, while rare, should at least be attempted. Even landlords get involved. In certain cities, rental contracts start including clauses about latrine access, which tenant gets, which corner of the courtyard, or how often the waste pit will be cleared. Imagine arguing over your turn with the neighborhood gong farmer. And as always, class draws a line through it all. You visit a merchant's townhouse and find not only a personal latrine, but a servant whose sole job is to empty and clean it. He wears gloves. He uses vinegar. He even airs the room out with lavender-soaked cloth. Just a few blocks away, a family of 5 relieves themselves in a shared backyard trench shielded only by a collapsing fence and the decency of neighbors. Both systems work, barely. But they feel different, they smell different, and they tell you something else. Toilets, once communal by default, are becoming symbols of privacy, status, and control. And in that dark, smelly corner of history, we find something startling. The beginning of the belief that where and how you poop should reflect who you are. Morning fog hugs the city like a damp cloak. You walk carefully, partly to avoid slipping on cobblestones still slick with the night's unfortunate outpourings, and partly because you just saw something dart past your foot. A rat, big, unbothered, and heading straight for the sewer grate. You're not surprised. By now, rats are more than a nuisance. They're folklore myth blame magnets, especially after 1361. That year, the second wave of the Black Death swept through Europe. Just when people thought the worst was over, it returned faster, deadlier, crueler. And with it came a new kind of fear, not just of death, but of what might be causing it. You find yourself in a narrow courtyard where a group of townsfolk have gathered around the body of a dead rat. A priest is muttering prayers. A woman spits 3 times. A child kicks it and runs away. Everyone agrees the rats are cursed. Here's where things get weird. People begin associating rats with toilets, because where do rats love to go? Warm, wet, shadowy spaces like privy pits, chamber pot closets, and drain channels. And suddenly the already gross world of sanitation becomes terrifying. Quirky moment. A London pamphlet from the late 1300s warned citizens not to sit on public latrines too long lest a rat crawl up and nibble tender bits. It's part hygiene advice, part urban legend, and 100% panic-fueled storytelling. Do rats actually spread plague through toilets? Historians still argue. Most modern scholars agree the real culprits were fleas riding aboard black rats, yes, but also jumping to humans' livestock, and even clothes. Still, once an idea takes hold, it doesn't matter if it's true. It feels true. And it changes behavior. In some cities, people start boarding up old toilet shafts. They dig shallow pits instead, further from the house, harder for rats to reach. Others put iron grates over privy holes. A few wealthy families go so far as to keep cats in their latrine rooms as living pest control. Even the architecture changes. Builders add steep slopes and sharper bends in chutes, trying to make them less appealing for rodents. One enterprising man in Ghent claims to have invented a rat-proof loo using oiled wood and slippery angles. You're skeptical, but you admire the effort. All this fear reshapes how people think about sanitation. It's no longer just about smell or convenience. It's about safety. And fear, it turns out, is an excellent motivator. You visit a physician, well, someone calling himself that, and he's designing a pest-thwarting privy for a noble client. It features a trapdoor that seals shut. After use, a compartment for burning sulfur to purify the air, and a hook for a lantern so you don't sit in the dark and get bitten. You doubt it works, but the client pays well because fear sells. Even the toilet accessory market explodes. People begin carrying toilet charms, small pouches of herbs, beads, or silver medallions meant to ward off rat spirits. Some hang these on their belts. Others dangle them from chamber pots. It's the birth of something odd and enduring, the idea that toilets should come with protection. In one city, rumor spreads that if you sprinkle ashes from a burnt rat around your latrine, it becomes blessed. Several people try it. No one reports success. But still, they try. And you realize something fascinating is happening. Public fear is turning into toilet innovation. People who once barely acknowledged their waste are now engineering, designing, modifying, not because they want cleaner toilets, but because they want safer ones. It's not the ideal motivator, but it works. Soon, city councils begin funding rat patrols. They hire boys to set traps, burn nests, and clean latrine sites. One clever fellow builds a mobile cart with a hooked pole to fish out rats from deep pits. He charges by the head, and business booming. This toilet rat connection even makes its way into literature. You read a satirical poem mocking a noblewoman who installs a rat throne, a privy so guarded it requires unlocking 2 doors and shouting a password before use. It's absurd, but not that far from real. And that's where we are now. Toilets, once ignored, now occupy an uneasy space in the medieval mind. They're disgusting, but essential. Dangerous, but inescapable. A place of relief, but also of risk. And perhaps the most telling change, people begin to keep records. You find ledger books noting privy cleanings, payments for waste removal, dates when latrines were sealed and reopened. Even notes like rats observed in Pit 3 this week. Toilets are no longer just background noise. They're part of the bureaucracy of survival. And as you leave the fog-damp street, stepping carefully over a rat trap baited with salted meat, you can't help but think they're also the first battleground of what will one day be called public health. You wake to the sound of a bell, not church, not market, but something else. A low clang that echoes through the alleyways like a warning. It's the gong farmer's bell. And you immediately hold your breath. He's coming down the street pushing a heavy wooden cart, dragging behind him the stench of everything you tried not to think about last night. He's covered head to toe, thick gloves, leather apron, scarf over his mouth. His eyes tired and practical, meet yours briefly before returning to the ruts in the road. No one greets him, but everyone depends on him. This is the man who clears the cesspits. He works at night, usually between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m., digging, scooping, shoveling human waste from deep holes beneath latrines, and transporting it sometimes miles away to dumping grounds outside the city. It's hard, filthy, and strangely well-paid work. Most gong farmers in 14th century England made 4 to 6 times the wages of a laborer, not because they were skilled, but because no one else wanted the job, and because if they stopped doing it, the entire city would fall apart quickly. You follow him as he disappears behind a gate marked with a red X, a sign that a pit has gone too long without cleaning. Inside, he lifts the trapdoor to reveal the cesspool below. You don't look long. The smell isn't just bad. It's dense, like the air itself has gone rancid. You step back. He steps forward. He doesn't gag. He's done this too many times. With a long-handled scoop, he begins the slow, methodical work of extraction. Bucket after bucket, load after load. Sometimes he finds objects, lost rings, broken knives, buttons, even coins. And yes, sometimes bones. Whether animal or human, he doesn't ask. But every so often there's a surprise, like the time a gong farmer uncovered a Roman mosaic floor beneath a collapsed privy in York, or the day one found a stash of forged coins buried under a pit in Norwich, hidden perhaps during a tax raid. Historians still argue whether these men were respected or reviled. Official records suggest both. Some cities granted gong farmers licenses and protection, even housing. Others pushed them to city edges, forcing them to live downwind from everyone else. But regardless of status, their work shaped toilet design. Builders began designing cesspits with removable covers. Some added steps or rails to help with cleaning. Others used layers, gravel, straw, wood, ash to reduce stink and speed decomposition. One city even experimented with compartmentalized pits, like an ancient version of your compost bin. Wet waste in one side, dry in the other. Stir weekly. Pray for rain. And slowly, the latrine becomes more intentional, not just a hole, not just an afterthought, but a system. In large houses, you begin seeing privy towers, tall stone structures, built alongside walls with vertical shafts, feeding into shared waste chambers below. These make cleaning easier, if not exactly pleasant. In monasteries, gong farmers collaborate with monks to create flushable systems, not with water pressure, but by channeling rainwater through carved troughs during storms. It's not elegant, but it's innovation. And perhaps strangest of all, people begin to think of waste not just as a problem, but as a resource. In many cities, human waste is sold to farmers. Night soil becomes fertilizer. It's rich in nitrogen, and when used sparingly, it boosts crop yields. That's right. The same muck you just saw hauled through the streets now ends up in fields helping grow onions, leeks, and barley. And this changes everything, because suddenly toilets aren't just about getting rid of filth. They're about managing a supply chain. In one small village, a local baron issues waste quotas. Each tenant must contribute a certain amount to the manor compost each month. Those who do, reduced rent. Those who don't, fines. It's crude, but it's the start of incentivized sanitation. And yes, there are dangers. Improperly cured waste spreads disease. Some pits overflow. Others collapse. Still, the idea takes root. If you can manage your own mess, you can control more than just your smell. You can shape your economy. Which brings us back to the gong farmer. He's not just scooping excrement. He's maintaining public health, enabling food production, shaping urban infrastructure. And yet, he'll never dine at a noble's table. He'll never get a statue. But as he passes by you, one last time tipping his hat with a gloved hand and vanishing into the pre-dawn shadows, you feel something shift. He's not disgusting. He's essential. Morning light slants across the uneven rooftops as you follow the scent of something sharp and strangely familiar. Vinegar. You're in the kitchen courtyard of a modest townhouse, watching a maid scrub the inside of a chamber pot with a rag soaked in vinegar and rosemary water. She's not just cleaning, she's disinfecting, or trying to, anyway, because by now, toilet cleaning has become its own ritual, almost sacred in its monotony. And increasingly, it's becoming a job, not just for the gong farmers who handle the heavy-duty cesspits, but for servants, midwives, even street vendors who moonlight as chamber pot detailers. As the post-plague world adjusts to new fears and old smells, sanitation labor divides even further. It becomes layered, stratified, its own ecosystem of maintenance. Some nobles, in fact, begin hiring dedicated closet women servants assigned solely to the care of personal latrines and toilet materials. Their job: keep the chamber pot fresh, the rags clean, the air bearable, and the noble's bottom unbothered. And if they fail, they're dismissed. Quickly. Because for the wealthy, hygiene is now a matter of identity. It's a strange shift. Before the Black Death, few people thought of toilets as a reflection of self-worth. They were basic, functional, invisible. Now, a properly scented chamber pot becomes a status symbol. You walk through a manor and spot one carved from Italian marble with gilt legs and a lid shaped like a lion's head. Inside, still just a pot, but outside, prestige. The wealthy are curating their waste. Meanwhile, the poor are adapting in subtler ways. A seamstress uses scraps of linen to line her pot, so cleaning is faster. A baker's wife sets her chamber pot atop a bed of wood, ash cheap odor control. A candle maker short on space stores her night pot beneath the bed, but wraps it in treated canvas to trap the stink. Quirky discovery: in several towns, toilet scents become aesthetic fads. Lavender and vinegar are top sellers, but others swear by pine-burnt rosemary. Even a mix of dried orange peels and goose fat. You wouldn't recommend the last one. And with all these new practices, the economy shifts again. Toilet accessories are now products. You pass a stall in a market square selling privy rags, now thicker, and chamber lid drapes in 4 colors. And yes, someone's making money from it. Some cities even tax chamber pots. If your household owns more than 3, you pay a sanitation fee, ostensibly to cover street cleaning. In practice, another sign that your toilet is becoming a public statement. Even language evolves. You begin to hear euphemisms, like visiting the corner, tending the bucket, or refreshing the lower cupboard. Toilet use becomes polite conversation, coded into household rhythms and social etiquette. But one group is especially transformed: midwives. Before the plague, their work was already vital. Birth, death, illness, advice. But after they become something more, they're called upon to examine waste for signs of plague, to monitor toilet habits for health clues, to recommend cleaning agents, rags, latrine placement, even pot materials based on illness type. In a way, midwives become the first toilet consultants, and they take it seriously. You overhear one warning a merchant's wife, "Your daughter's privy should be moved west. The shadow there fosters rot." Is it science? Not really, but it sounds convincing, and sometimes it even works. Historians still debate whether this was medical progress or medieval superstition. One thing's clear: people paid attention. And this cultural shift, this new intimacy with filth, leads to some surprisingly thoughtful design. You visit a bathhouse being converted into private toilet rooms. Each has a small window, a stone seat, and a hole leading to a concealed pit. It's not luxurious, but it's intentional. Meanwhile, inventors and tinkerers begin experimenting. One designs a rotating seat meant to be flipped after use. Another adds a hidden compartment for storing herbs beneath the lid. Yet another builds a pot with a double basin urine in one, feces in the other. The idea: sell the urine for dyeing cloth. And here's the weird part: some of these ideas catch on. Urine becomes a commodity. It's used in textile work, leather tanning, even as a cleaning agent. Entire neighborhoods designate urine collection jars, not unlike bottle recycling bins today. And once again, the toilet is no longer wasteful. It's productive. People manage their outputs like resources measured, stored, sold, not just to survive, but to get ahead. You stop by a tanner's workshop. He's surrounded by barrels of foul-smelling liquid, cheerfully stirring with a paddle. "Best leather comes from the bottom of the pot," he says with a grin. You choose not to ask what that means. Still, you realize something profound. The toilet has gone from shame to strategy. Not clean, not ideal, but undeniably central. Not just to households, to commerce, to medicine, to identity. And as you sit beside a window, watching a maid carry out her polished pot, wrapped in fabric perfumed with rosemary, balanced like a sacred object, you understand. They weren't just surviving the plague. They were redesigning their world, one pot at a time. You find yourself at the edge of a bustling fairground just outside town, a spring festival, thick with the smell of roasting chestnuts, spilled ale, and something less delightful drifting from a row of canvas-covered booths near the hedges. Toilets, or rather, the public conveniences of the 14th century. They're not much. A few wooden enclosures barely tall enough for privacy, with a pit dug beneath and a plank laid across for perching. No doors, no ventilation. Just hope speed and maybe a sprig of lavender if you're lucky. You approach one cautiously. Someone stumbles out looking a bit green. You decide to wait. Public toilets like these, known as Jake's necessaries, or simply the hole, are a mixed blessing, technically available to all but avoided by most. Their main virtue, location. They're placed near markets, fairs, docks, and churches, anywhere large crowds gather, and they're usually managed by local guilds or town councils who hire workers to empty the pits and sprinkle lime. And yet, they still stink. You overhear two women arguing about whether to brave the Jakes or walk home. One insists she'll risk it. The other says she'd rather burst than breathe that in. Quirky fact, some cities experimented with floating toilets, outhouses, suspended over rivers. Paris had several along the Seine, and London tried a few over the Thames. The theory running water would carry it all away. The reality, not quite. In summer, the riverbanks became sludge fields. The smell, biblical, and downstream. Well, let's just say you wouldn't want to swim. Still, it's innovation of a kind. Historians still argue whether public toilets were actually useful or just performative. Many towns built them to show they were modern, civic-minded, and post-plague hygienic. But usage was inconsistent. You peer into a record book from York. One entry reads, "New Jakes at Fisher's Gate. 5 nights use. Then filled by dogs and stones. Rebuilding advised." Not exactly 5 stars on the medieval Yelp. So, people adapted. Some vendors brought their own pots, small portable devices that looked like ceramic kettles. You'd duck behind a stall squat, over it, cover it quickly, and move on. Privacy was a luxury. So was dignity. Others held it all day. A bold few simply found the nearest alley, and the boldest, well, they didn't bother hiding at all. That's why public shaming became a thing. In cities like Prague and Florence, laws appeared banning street fouling. Offenders were fined or worse named. Some towns even posted violators on wooden boards in town squares. Here lies the name of one who could not wait. Public toilets had become a moral issue. And that's when something new emerges, the public toilet, as virtue. Rich merchants donate latrines to their neighborhoods. Churches build jakes for the weary pilgrim. Town councils brag about 10 clean seats with oak doors in their annual reports. It's not just sanitation, it's PR. You pass one such latrine in a wealthier part of town. It's built of stone has actual hinges on the seats, a sloped drain, and even a small window. It's still not pleasant, but it feels safer, cleaner, cared for. And that's the point. Toilets become part of a city's identity. London boasts of its sewer work. Lübeck advertises its wind-cooled privies. Bruges paints a mural on a latrine wall. Cherubs holding bundles of herbs, because why not? Even the concept of toilet queues emerges here. In places with real jakes, people begin lining up quietly, politely, grimly. You join one just to feel the cultural shift. It's awkward. No one talks. Everyone looks at the ground. But there's a shared understanding. This is better than the alternative. You hear a child ask his father, "Why does that place have a little roof?" And the father answers, "Because we care. It's sweet and a little ridiculous." But maybe that's how civilizations progress, one awkward, smelly queue at a time. Of course, problems remain. Privy pits overflow. Drainage fails. And when it rains, everything becomes an open sewer. But still, the intention is there. You see it in the way people protect their shoes, laying boards across puddles. You hear it in the way they warn each other. Mind your step near the jakes. You feel it in the shift from panic to policy. And you realize, standing at the edge of a pit, lined with brick and optimism, that these aren't just toilets anymore. They're statements. Statements that say, we remember what happened when we didn't care. And more importantly, we're trying. You're walking through a cobbled back alley just wide enough for a cart when your foot brushes against something soft. You look down. It's a pig's bladder, tied off with twine and half filled with liquid. You blink. Because you know what that is. That's a urine balloon, not a prank, not a toy, but a sample likely being delivered to a dyer, a leather worker, or an alchemist. Because in the late 14th and 15th centuries, human waste, especially urine, became one of the most traded substances in Europe. Yes, really. And it wasn't just used. It was valued, collected, stored, even taxed. You turn a corner and see the source, a row of earthenware jugs lined up outside a tavern door, each one sealed with wax. A boy is crouched beside them, counting. He scribbles something on a chalkboard. This is the piss-pot economy in action. Taverns, bathhouses, and inns became central players. Their patrons, usually male, usually drinking, produced reliable volumes of urine, and urine was needed. For tanning, leather breaks down hair and softens hides, setting dyes, especially in wool and linen production, cleaning clothes. Ammonia makes a great degreaser. Alchemy and proto-medicine. Don't ask what they thought it did. And so establishments began monetizing their waste. Pots were labeled. Piss was measured. Contracts were signed. One London guild paid a tavern for exclusive collection rights. Another fined households who dumped unmarked urine because it was considered theft of valuable resource. You pass a tax record from 1378, 4 jugs of Sweetwater urine sold at 3 groats. One jug, foul discarded. That's right. Even quality control mattered. Historians still argue whether this system created real economic impact or was just a niche practice exaggerated by quirky chroniclers. But the evidence stacks up. You duck into a dyer's shop. Inside, the smell is pungent, sour chemical, oddly floral. Urine mixed with stale beer and madder root bubbles in shallow basins. A man stirs it with a stick. 3 days old, he says proudly, the best age for fixing reds. You decide not to stay long, but the concept lingers, because this isn't just gross, it's logical. In a world short on resources, people found uses for everything, even pee. And this practical approach to waste starts shifting public perception. You meet a washerwoman who collects morning urine from her neighbors. It lifts grease, she explains, scrubbing a tunic, better than ash soap. Her neighbors don't mock her. They thank her for saving theirs. In some towns, this exchange becomes formalized. You give a pint, you get a token. 10 tokens buys you cloth cleaning or a free hour at the communal oven. Suddenly, urine is part of the local economy. And it's not just urban. You pass a rural farm where buckets are hung beneath the outhouse seat, not for waste, but for separation. Liquids in one, solids in another. Easier to transport, easier to sell. This early waste sorting mirrors what we'd now call composting or graywater systems. But they weren't thinking about the planet. They were thinking about profit. And then the inevitable regulation. City councils begin licensing collectors, often called urine men or gold potters. They're required to use sealed vessels. Spillage results in fines. Storage too close to a neighbor's wall, more fines. In one case, a merchant is taken to court for hoarding 42 jugs of stale urine in a warm cellar. His neighbors claim the heat awoke the stench. He argues it's aging toward potency. The judge orders the jugs moved to the roof. You pass that roof now. It drips slightly. You step back. Still, these are signs of sanitation evolving with economy. Waste no longer disappears into ditches. It becomes part of supply chains. A weaver you meet even calculates his yearly cloth costs based on expected urine donations from family and neighbors. He has a spreadsheet, or rather a wax tablet, but you get the idea. And somewhere in all this, the toilet becomes decentralized. No longer just a private, shameful necessity, it's a hub of output, a resource point, a node in the household network. You pass a home with 2 pots, one for use, one for trade. The children know the difference. One gets emptied into the compost. The other gets stored in a shaded nook like a fine wine. You're not making this up. And in alchemical circles, things get stranger. Urine is called aqua vitae by some, the yellow salt by others. They boil it, distill it, sniff it, chart it. One alchemist claims aged urine, when heated with lead and basil leaves, produces sun powder. No one knows what that means. He died shortly after. Still, curiosity flourishes. and so does creativity. You begin to see homes with dedicated piss shelves, little cubbies near the door for safe pot storage. Some are labeled, some are decorative, all of them practical. And when the pot's full, you don't dump it. You sell it. Because in this strange moment of post-plague history, waste becomes wealth. And your toilet, it becomes a bank. You step out of the tangled alleyways and into a quieter district, still medieval, still fragrant, but with larger houses and tidy courtyards. This is where the merchant class lives now, the ones who thrived after the plague, the ones who discovered that a well-maintained toilet is no longer just for health, it's for legacy. Yes, welcome to the world of toilet inheritance. It sounds absurd, but you're standing in front of a hand-carved stone privy seat built into the back wall of a prosperous home. It's polished smooth from generations of use, framed by vines and surrounded by little decorative tiles, each one painted with a family crest or biblical quote. The owner catches you looking. "Built by my grandfather," he says proudly. "Still the warmest seat in the house." You blink, because this is new. Before the plague, toilets were transient. You had a pot, you dumped it, you forgot about it. But now, as homes grow more permanent and sanitation more respected, toilets begin to take on a generational role. Some are passed down in wills. You glimpse one document from 1421 that reads, "To my eldest son, I leave the stone latrine with the drainage trench and the southern-facing seat. Let him keep it as clean as our name." Historians still argue whether these bequests were symbolic or serious. But the trend is clear. Toilets are now worth preserving. You tour one house that has a two-seater privy with separate drainage paths, one angled toward a garden compost pit, the other toward the alley ditch. The younger son explains it like a sommelier. The left seats for night use the right for summer breezes. You nod politely. Elsewhere, you see toilets built into tower rooms, accessible only by private staircases, essentially toilet turrets. Some even have shutters for ventilation or little benches for reading. One woman shows you a woven basket of poems meant to be read while taking one's ease. Most of them are about mortality, God, or pigs. A few are disturbingly romantic. And then you reach the hidden libraries. Yes, toilets for the wealthy are now doubling as quiet reflection spaces. Bookshelves line the walls. There's a candle holder, a cushion, a window. One man boasts he writes his sermons in there. You wonder what that says about the sermons. But again, the symbolism matters. This is no longer a space of embarrassment. It's one of ritual and solitude, and the architecture reflects it. You walk through a home being renovated. The mason explains they're building a courtyard flow latrine, a channel dug from an inner courtyard lined with pebbles and ash that allows all three household pots to drain away with morning rainwater. It's elegant, almost poetic. And in monasteries, the designs become engineering marvels. You visit one in southern France. Their toilets are built over a diverted stream which flushes waste down carved stone channels and into a distant cesspit near the orchard. Every Thursday, a monk inspects the flow using a wax-coated stick. His title, Privy Master. You follow him. He hums as he works. It's oddly soothing. But not every innovation is elegant. Some merchants obsessed with cleanliness begin installing privy cages, wooden enclosures for chamber pots meant to block out smell-preserve warmth and discourage bugs. They look like tiny prisons. One even has a latch. You shudder. And of course, new accessories flood the market. Toilet seats with cushions, chamber pot lids with built-in incense trays. One clever tailor designs a privy cloak, a thick woolen garment with a back flap and drawstring. It becomes surprisingly popular. Quirky fact in some towns, toilet rugs become a fashion statement. Woven from rushes and scraps, they're dyed bright red or green to hide stains. Households compete for patterns. One poem reads, "Your cloth may shine, your chamber gleam, but my privy boasts the finest seam." Rivalry, it seems, extends even to the seat of solitude. And then there's the toilet guest book. Yes, you heard that right. In one noble's home, visitors are asked to write something after using the latrine. Some leave prayers, others leave complaints. One knight wrote, "Too drafty, needs hawthorn sprig." You suspect he wasn't invited back, but underneath all the eccentricity, you sense something profound. These toilets, these evolving, elaborate, increasingly personal spaces are not just about function anymore. They're about control. In a post-plague world filled with uncertainty, decay, and sudden death, the ability to clean, to contain, to preserve becomes almost sacred. And so people invest in it, emotionally, socially, architecturally. Your toilet isn't just where you relieve yourself, it's where you reflect, where you plan, where you survive, and for some, where you leave a legacy. You're sitting now, not on a toilet though, that would be thematic, but on a wooden bench beneath a public notice board, staring at something rather odd. A drawing of a box with a hole, a series of arrows, and a frowny face. Next to it, a parchment nailed neatly in place. Written in stiff, flowery calligraphy, it reads, "To all good citizens, misuse of the night chamber chute shall result in forfeiture of rights to street water." You look around. A few people glance at it, shrug, and move on, because by now, late in the post-plague timeline, the relationship between people and their waste has become bureaucratized. And that brings us to the next chapter in our smelly saga, the first indoor toilet designs. You step into the home of a city official. It's dark paneled in wood and smells faintly of candle wax and ambition. And in the corner, tucked discreetly behind a velvet curtain, is something marvelous. A wooden throne, ornately carved with a seat that lifts to reveal a polished chamber pot built into a box. There's even a hinged lid with embroidered padding, He calls it the quiet chair. You're impressed. Until he lifts the cushion and a startled mouse leaps out. Because that's the truth about early indoor toilets. They're innovative, yes, but also wildly flawed. Many are little more than glorified boxes. The wealthy want convenience, but the materials, wood, straw, ceramics, don't exactly make for airtight engineering. Some include rudimentary drainage chutes built into walls meant to carry waste down into the courtyard or garden. But gravity is tricky. Angles aren't always precise. And in winter, those chutes freeze. One Parisian noblewoman writes in a letter, "I sat for ease and felt the air of January whistle through me. It was like kissing the devil's trumpet." Historians still debate whether indoor toilets improved hygiene overall or just brought the stink inside. But either way, people keep trying. You enter another house. This one has a closet of ease, a literal small room just big enough for a person, and a pot. There's a window, a shelf for herbs, and a jug of vinegar for wiping. It's the precursor to the water closet. It smells like damp thyme. Down the road, a merchant shows off his mechanical flushing seat. He pulls a lever, and a wooden flap opens beneath the pot, letting waste fall into a lower chute. There's no water, of course, just gravity and good intentions. It's loud. It creaks. A hinge snaps off. He pretends not to notice. Then there are the foolhardy designs. You see one blueprint from 1475 with an elaborate system of counterweights and pulleys that lifts the seat when you step on a mat. It's meant to be hands-free. It's also responsible for 3 broken toes and 1 cracked chamber pot. And the ventilation obsession begins. People drill holes in walls, install tiny chimneys near the privy seat, and even experiment with cloth stink traps stuffed with dried rose petals and charcoal. One pamphlet recommends hanging eels in the chute to absorb ill humors. No explanation given. You raise an eyebrow. And yet, despite the absurdities, these early designs represent a shift in mindset. Toilets are moving indoors, both literally and symbolically. No longer the secret shame in the backyard, they're becoming a part of daily life, daily routine, and domestic design. One widow tells you her husband built their toilet near the bed for convenience. You ask how that worked. She grimaces. "We burned a lot of sage." Still, it was worth it. Because privacy matters now. Not just from neighbors, but from exposure, to wind, to illness, to judgment. People begin separating toilets by gender, by class, even by occasion. One estate has the daytime seat and the feast night stool. You decide not to ask further. And innovations continue. You visit a stone manor with a vertical shaft running through all 3 floors. On each level, there's a little seat stacked directly above the next. It's efficient. It's horrifying. It's called a vertical guardrobe. The family calls it the descent. You imagine what it's like to sit on the top floor and hear echoes. And still they keep trying, because the dream of clean, private, efficient indoor relief never dies. Not even when the rat problem worsens. Not even when ammonia builds up in the walls. Not even when a guest once dropped their ring down the chute and insisted the household pray for its return. They did. It didn't. You end the day in a modest home where a grandmother pats a wooden box affectionately. 3 generations have sat on this, she says, and you smile because suddenly that weird, creaky, vaguely cursed chair doesn't seem so ridiculous anymore. It seems like hope, covered in linen and maybe a bit of mildew, but hope all the same. You wake up figuratively, of course, just in time to visit a bustling medieval festival. It's loud, joyous, slightly chaotic. There are meat pies, fiddles, a bear on a chain, and amid all this excitement, there's a man yelling about toilets, more specifically, public toilets, or as he calls them, comfort stalls for the traveling soul. He's not wrong, because by the late 15th century, public sanitation is becoming an urban concern, not just a private one. Cities have grown denser, streets are tighter, trade is booming, and so is the population, which means people need somewhere to go. You find the comfort stalls at the edge of the square, a long wooden structure with partitions, a common trough underneath, and a man charging a small fee. It's primitive, it's smelly, but it's civilized. Sort of. He hands you a cloth square. For wiping, he says, or keeping as a souvenir. You politely return it. Because here's the thing, public toilets in the late medieval world were revolutionary, but they were also a wild experiment in crowd control engineering and social behavior. Many cities started with communal latrines, basic ditches, dug behind markets or near rivers. Some were lined with stone, some had benches, most were open air, and they quickly turned into disasters. One London account describes a market ditch so overused that the surrounding stalls sank a full inch into the ground. People wore tall shoes just to walk through. Historians still argue whether these ditches were ever intended to be permanent or simply overflow solutions that outlived their welcome. Either way, city councils began to intervene. You peek into a council record from Florence, 1483, a decree mandating that every public event must provide a relieving tent for women and a designated wall for the needs of common men. Yes, they literally told men to pee on this wall. Not that one. Charming. In Paris, civic pride meant more elaborate designs. Some public privies had partial roofs, tiled interiors, and even attendants who carried buckets of lime to scatter over the floor. One was nicknamed the Scented Pavilion. It still smelled like boiled cabbage. But the best example, that's in Lübeck. You travel there now, mentally of course, and find a series of bridge toilets, tiny rooms built into the edges of city bridges. They hang over the water. Waste drops directly into the river. Problem solved. Sort of. Because downstream, that's where the washerwomen worked. You meet one. Her hands are raw from scrubbing. She looks up and mutters, "If you hear a splash above, don't look up." You take her advice. Still, Cities loved bridge toilets. They were space-efficient, practical, and strangely picturesque. Tourists even wrote about them. I visited the bridge and made use of its charms. We don't know what he meant. We don't want to know. Other cities used the stairwell model privies tucked under staircases in public buildings with a bucket below. Someone, the lowest paid person in town, emptied them nightly. One such worker in Prague was known only as Old Bucket Tom. He had his own song. You don't sing it, but you admire his dedication. And then there are the floating toilets. Yes, really. On the Thames, small barges were converted into latrine platforms. Patrons paid a coin, boarded the boat, and did their business over the river. One enterprising woman even offered tea and privacy. Another sold biscuits. This innovation didn't last. Why? Because a strong current once tipped a latrine barge mid-use. 5 people went in. 2 came out dry. But it highlights a central truth. Public sanitation was improvisational. Cities tried everything. Elevated, outhouses, troughs, with rain spouts, sand pits, lined with herbs. Some towns issued waste whistles, little flutes blown by cleaners to signal a full bucket. Others painted skulls on walls near latrines to remind users of mortality. It didn't help. Still, a sense of order slowly emerged. You see a city map from Bruges with latrines marked by little squiggly symbols. Some even have operating hours, sunrise to 9th bell. One is labeled for clergy only. Another, curiously, is marked dogs discouraged. Eventually, you pass a covered walkway where the walls are painted with toilet etiquette poems. One says, "Sit soft, speak low, leave nothing but flow. If trouble you make, the bucket you take." Beautiful and strange, because despite all the effort, all the rules, and all the inventions, medieval public toilets still walked the line between necessity and nuisance. And you admire them for trying, for building little shrines to hygiene in the middle of chaos, for charging a penny to preserve public dignity, for handing you a cloth square with a wink and saying, "Welcome to civilization." You keep walking past the privies and past the people, waiting their turn. Because tonight, you're not just tracing the history of toilets. You're witnessing the slow, stubborn rise of public health, one stinking step at a time. You're walking through a monastery now. The walls echo softly with whispered chants, and the scent of beeswax and old parchment lingers in the cool stone air. You've arrived at one of the most unexpected centers of toilet innovation in the medieval world, the cloistered privy system. Because while the rest of society was fumbling with wooden boxes and wind-chilled chutes, monks were quietly, patiently engineering some of the most advanced sanitation systems of the age. Of course they were. You start in the scriptorium, where a monk gestures politely for silence and points you down a corridor lined with carved arches and soft straw mats toward what he calls the necessarium. That's right, the monastic toilet block, sometimes euphemistically called the House of Silence, which feels appropriate. You step inside, and are surprised to see it's multi-seated, with a long stone bench pierced by holes spaced respectfully apart. Beneath it, a flowing water channel. That's right, running water, flushed with diverted stream flow. The entire design is clean, symmetrical, and shockingly modern. One friar smiles and whispers, "Better than the baker's outhouse." Yes, he's not wrong. Historians still debate whether all monasteries had such systems, or if these were privileges of wealthier orders like the Cistercians. But the surviving blueprints are clear. Some monks were plumbing pioneers. Some systems used multiple tanks, one for urine, one for solid waste, another for rainwater rinse. Others featured separate entrance and exit points to avoid awkward eye contact during spiritual business. In one abbey, the privy even had a reading nook with copies of devotional texts nailed to the wall. You hope they didn't turn the pages. And then there's the toilet schedule. Monks ran on time. Literally. The bell rang. You had 5 minutes. Next bell. Done. Efficiency. Thy name is Benedictine rule. They even had rules for toilet silence. One order mandated no speech while seated unless fire or falling masonry. Reasonable. Still not all was serene. You peer into a record book listing privy infractions. One novice was reprimanded for humming, another for bringing honey cakes, a third scandalously for giggling. There were also accidents. One tale describes a monk who dropped his crucifix down the chute and tried to retrieve it with a fishing rod. It didn't end well. The crucifix was never recovered. The rod was confiscated. Yet, despite the occasional mishap, the system worked. Monasteries became models of sanitation, so much so that some nearby towns copied their designs. A few even hired monks to consult on drainage layouts. One invoice reads, "To Brother Walter for advice on chamber slope and miasma mitigation, 3 shillings and 1 goose." You wonder how helpful Walter actually was, but the goose probably enjoyed the attention. And what about the nuns? You visit a convent quieter still, with ivy climbing the walls and a gentler rhythm to daily life. Their toilets are smaller single stalls mostly, but just as advanced. Some even have wooden hand warmers built into the walls. One nun proudly shows you a towel she embroidered for lavatory reflection. You don't ask for details. Yet it's here in this cloistered world that you realize something important. While much of medieval society feared filth as a fact of life, monks treated cleanliness as moral practice, not vanity, not luxury, but discipline. They cleaned their privies with ash and vinegar. They rotated their waste pits yearly. Some grew herbs, mint rue sage, outside the privy windows to freshen the air. And when things went wrong, they wrote about it. You read one passage. "This morning, the eastern channel did overflow. Brother Simon did slip. His robe was lost, but his composure never. Bless you, Brother Simon. But the most striking discovery isn't the water, or the rules, or the quiet dignity of it all. It's the foresight. These toilet systems weren't built for show. They weren't even built for comfort. They were built for the long term, for generations of monks who would live, pray, and relieve themselves in careful harmony. They planned the flow, they measured the slopes, they dug their channels deep and lined them with stone. They imagined a future where sanitation didn't have to be disgusting, it just had to be designed. And so you stand there in a shadowed corridor between two polished privy stalls and you feel grateful for the quiet minds who thought about what happened after the flush, for the hands that built with care, for the centuries of anonymous effort that made the modern bathroom possible, and for the monk who dropped his crucifix because history needs its comic relief too. You leave the monastery and step back into the noisy, unpredictable sprawl of the city. By now it's the early 1500s, and urban centers across Europe are starting to resemble something modern, narrower streets, more permanent homes, and most importantly, for tonight's journey, the early framework of sanitation laws. Because here's the quiet truth. After centuries of trial, error, stink, and occasionally exploding privies, cities have begun to codify waste, not philosophically, legally. Welcome to the era of toilets by law. You wander through a city clerk's office, piles of parchment, dusty inkpots, a man snoring softly into a registry book, and leaf through a document titled On Public Nuisances and Domestic Drains. Catchy. In it, a new rule. Every home must build a waste chute that doth not empty near a neighbor's window, nor endanger chickens. Seems fair. This is part of a wider movement across England, France, Italy, and parts of the Holy Roman Empire to regulate where and how people can go. Public health for the first time is seen not just as individual virtue, but civic responsibility. You pass through a narrow alley where two neighbors argue about a leaking pipe. One waves a bill from the town council, the other threatens to bring in the waste assessor. You walk faster. Historians still argue whether these early laws were enforced consistently or merely symbolic, but the records show something remarkable. For the first time, toilet placement is political. In Hamburg, house blueprints submitted to the city must include a waste chamber with diagrammed flow. In Florence, citizens pay taxes based on the number of latrines per dwelling. In York, it becomes illegal to defecate in sight of the cathedral. One man is fined for midnight relief upon the bishop's gate. A second is punished for dropping night soil into the Guild fountain. A third, who allegedly built a 2-story toilet without a permit, is publicly scolded by a man holding a plunger, and yet it works. You notice streets are slightly cleaner. Waste is less visible. Chamber pots are discreetly tucked away. Water carriers and gong farmers are part of the civic payroll now. Sanitation becomes a profession, not just a punishment. You follow a team of city workers armed with shovels, vinegar, and pinched expressions as they patrol the alleyways, checking for illegal ditches. One says, "Last week we found a shoe factory draining into a bakery trench." You nod, solemnly. No further questions. Some towns install central cesspits, giant shared vaults, sealed under the streets, emptied monthly by teams with long poles and stronger stomachs. Others experiment with sewer canals, though gravity remains an unreliable ally. And the language changes, too. Words like night soil, privy levy, and sludge order begin appearing in city notices. One pamphlet even advertises waste insurance, a service promising to clean up after guests for a modest fee. It's bureaucracy, sure, but it's also progress. Even the church gets involved. You watch a priest deliver a sermon on the moral importance of cleanliness. The soul is like a cistern. Unemptied, it doth overflow into sin. People nod. One woman holds a perfumed kerchief to her nose. Toilets, once hidden shamefully behind barns and under stairs, now find their way into blueprints, debates, and even city budgets. Architects begin to plan homes with dedicated waste space, small closets with sloped floors, drainage holes, and even ventilation chimneys. One Italian merchant boasts that his daughter's dowry includes a closet with marble seat and south-facing chute. Another writes to his cousin, "We dine on the terrace now and defecate with dignity." Rome wasn't built in a day, but its latrines were mapped by decree. Still, not everyone adapts gracefully. You watch an old tailor mutter angrily while hauling a sloshing bucket through the fog. In my day, we just aimed for the hedge. He pours the contents down a grated drain marked licensed waste channel. Progress. You end your stroll in a quiet square where the city's first public latrine house stands, a tiled structure with a wooden awning, carved stone benches, and a full-time attendant knitting quietly. A small sign reads, "Relief with respect, cleanliness with coin." It's tidy, peaceful, strangely hopeful. Because after centuries of chaos, of falling through seats, freezing mid-use, battling rats, and rogue chamber pots, humanity is organizing its excrement. You feel proud. In a very odd, very specific way. It took disease desperation monks and no small amount of accidents, but civilization is finally learning that health begins at the bottom, and from here it only goes upstream. You walk toward the edge of town now, past the tiled public latrine, past the street sweepers, the law clerks, the waste inspectors, and the occasional rat who still thinks he's in charge. You're leaving the chaos of medieval and early modern plumbing behind and stepping into something that feels more familiar, sort of. Because here we are in the 1700s and 1800s and modern toilets are finally on the horizon, sort of. Don't get too comfortable yet. This is the transitional period where innovation races ahead of infrastructure and where the phrase indoor plumbing is still more of a rich person's daydream than a working-class reality. You find yourself in an elegant Georgian townhouse. The wallpaper is floral. The teacups are porcelain. And somewhere behind a curtained panel or tucked in a linen closet, there's a water closet. That's right. An actual, honest-to-history flush toilet. You open the door. There it is. A wooden seat, a handle to pull, and a tank suspended overhead. It looks respectable, dignified, almost regal, until you open the tank and realize it's leaking loudly into the walls. Welcome to the Victorian era. Historians still debate whether the invention of the modern flush toilet belongs to John Harrington Godson, to Queen Elizabeth I, an inventor of something he called the Ajax, or Alexander Cummings, who patented the S-trap in 1775, or Thomas Crapper, whose name is not as widely believed a joke, but rather his very real plumbing empire. Either way, by the 19th century, the pieces were coming together: porcelain bowls, water tanks, pull chains, trap seals. The toilet, as an idea, had arrived. But the sewer, the actual destination for all this innovation, still catching up, because for all their flushing brilliance, most early toilets dumped waste straight into open drains, which led to rivers, which led to water supplies, which led to cholera. And that, my friend, is why the 19th century stank, especially in cities like London, where entire neighborhoods use the Thames for drinking, bathing, and everything else. You stand now by the riverbank. It is summer, it is hot, and it is unimaginably foul. One observer wrote, "The stench rose like a vengeful cloud." Another described the water as black and thick as broth. A third simply said, "I wept." The great stink of 1858. You're here, it's real. So real, in fact, that Parliament suspended session. Curtains were soaked in lime. Riverboats stopped running. People fainted from the odor. And in the middle of it all, a man named Joseph Bazalgette, an engineer, a planner, a hero with a slide rule. Bazalgette didn't just design sewers, he redesigned London. He built massive underground channels to carry waste far from the city out to sea, with gravity science and bricks the size of small dogs. And it worked. The stink faded, the cholera declined, and the flush toilet finally had a home. You smile, because after centuries of falls, floods, fumes, and fatalities, the modern bathroom has arrived, more or less. You finish the loop now, stepping through time like a sleepwalker, with a purpose, remembering all the strange and stubborn ways humans have tried to manage the most inevitable part of life. We've used pots, pits, poles, and pulleys. We've battled rats, fires, and frozen chutes. We've written poetry on toilet walls and scolded bishops for improper dumping. We've invented, ignored, regulated, and reinvented. And all of it led here, to a porcelain bowl, a silver handle, a quiet flush, to dignity, to privacy, to peace, even in the dark, even late at night, when the house is still and the only sound is the gentle hum of a distant pipe carrying yesterday's problems down and away. And now, with one more step, you're back, safe, quiet, warm. You made it through history's most horrifying, hilarious, and utterly human journey. And you did it with grace. Almost. So now, let's slow it down. You've wandered through centuries of spills and smells, through cities that tried their best, and monasteries that quietly did better. You've seen toilets built into cliffs, suspended from bridges, tucked beneath stairwells, and floating on rivers. You've heard about chamber pots that doubled as weapons laws, that punished leaks, and monks who took sanitation as seriously as salvation. It's a lot. But now there's nothing left to clean up. No more buckets to carry. No more laws to memorize. Just this moment's still gentle quiet. Let the stories fade into soft shapes. Let the clang of pipes and splash of old water dissolve into background hum. Your mind can rest now, knowing that even something as humble and honestly as ridiculous as a toilet had a history that mattered. Because in the end, what we build to care for ourselves and for each other tells you everything about who we are. So, lie back, sink deeper into stillness. Maybe smile a little, remembering Brother Simon and his unfortunate fishing pole, or the girl whose dowry included a south-facing chute, or the rat who got away with it. They'll still be there in the morning if you ever want to visit them again. But tonight, it's just you and peace. And the knowledge that no matter how messy things get, someone somewhere is figuring out a better way to flush it all away. Sleep well, you've earned it.